When an African country landlocked, hit hard by drought and instability, decides to make the tomato a state policy, it's not just about farming anymore. It's about sovereignty. Back in 2023, President Ibrahim Traoré announced an $8 million investment to build a tomato processing plant in Burkina Faso. The goal is crystal clear: reduce waste, replace imported goods, and restore dignity to the work of the farmer. Starting in 2024, the plant is expected to begin operations with the capacity to process 5 tons of tomatoes every hour. It looks like a simple project on the surface, but its meaning runs deep. After all, when nearly 90% of the population relies on agriculture, every single piece of produce saved from spoiling is also a life protected from poverty. But the big question remains: can an industrial project focused on the basics really change the fate of Burkina Faso and inspire other positive news stories out of Africa? Can a young leader like Ibrahim Traoré prove that sovereignty starts with the bread, or in this case, the tomato on his people's table? If you believe the truth deserves to be told beyond the headlines, subscribe and follow this entire reflection. Burkina Faso is above all an agricultural nation. Between 80 and 90% of the population lives directly off the land. In 2021, tomato production was robust, but somewhere between 30 to 40% of that harvest was lost due to a lack of storage and processing capability. The consequences were bitter: farmers without buyers, families without a steady income, and the country stuck depending on purees and extracts imported from Europe. It was in this environment that in 2023, President Ibrahim Traoré presented the people with a bold and pragmatic plan: build a tomato processing factory, with the announced investment of $8 million. The specific detail, whether this money is from national funds or international financing, is still open, but the political goal is obvious. The factory, set up on a 3-hectare area, was designed to be built in less than a year. The official forecast is for operations to start in 2024. With the capacity to process 5 tons of tomato paste per hour, the plant promises not only to save the produce, but also to create 100 direct jobs and around 5,000 indirect jobs. The operating model combines a central farm, responsible for 55% of the production, with contracts with small farmers within a 20-kilometer radius, who will provide the remaining 45%. This integration guarantees a stable supply and includes thousands of farming families in the value chain. But these numbers by themselves don't tell the whole story. The true impact of this decision will be seen in the real life of the farmer and in the people's reaction. The true emotional peak of this story isn't in the cold numbers, but in the day the first harvest was delivered without spoiling along the way. For years, farming families in Burkina Faso watched a large part of their labor rot in the fields, or be sold in a hurry to middlemen for unfair prices. The arrival of the tomato factory changed that script. For the first time, the farmer holds a contract in hand. He knows the day he will deliver his harvest, the amount he will be paid, and who will receive the fruit of his labor. Uncertainty is replaced by predictability. Despair gives way to hope. And what seemed like just another political promise is turning into a tangible reality. The emotion is visible. Women who used to watch tomatoes spoil in their yards are now organizing delivery cooperatives. Young people who thought about migrating are finding work in the plant's transportation and maintenance. Small business owners are opening warehouses and markets around the new production hub. In this scenario, Ibrahim Traoré doesn't appear as a distant savior, but as a manager who knew how to act on what was essential. The decision to invest in tomatoes might seem simple to outsiders, but for those who live off the land, it's a historic change. It's the dignity returning to the family's tables, along with the income and the confidence. The reactions were immediate. In the local markets, farmers speak with relief. Now we know where our produce is going. On community radios, the conversation has changed. People are no longer just discussing violence or instability, but the quality of the tomato delivery deadlines and the prices being paid. This change in narrative is in itself a silent revolution. Civil society observes with caution, but also with pride. Seeing a plant go up in less than a year is a sign that the state can be fast and efficient when the political will exists. For many, this is the first concrete example of a public policy that has actually left the drawing board under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership. At the political level, the decision strengthens Traoré's image as a leader who delivers. But it also creates a responsibility to keep the factory running, ensure transparency in the management of the $8 million, and make sure the benefits truly reach the small producers. Critics note that security challenges could affect logistics, but even they acknowledge the progress. In the news from Africa, the case is getting attention. A country previously portrayed only through instability is now offering a narrative of work, contracts, and dignity. The emotional climax is not just the tomatoes turned into paste, but the collective feeling that the state can be useful and that agriculture can be valued as a driving force for development. On the civil side, the impact of the tomato factory goes far beyond agricultural production. With stable contracts and predictable prices, farming families reduce their dependence on middlemen and can plan better for the future. This means less debt, more ability to save, and the possibility of investing in seeds, tools, and education for their children. Migration to the big cities, often driven by desperation, also tends to slow down. When there's income in the countryside, young people don't need to abandon their villages in search of a precarious living in the urban outskirts. On the contrary, many are beginning to see the agricultural sector as a real opportunity for advancement. Women, traditionally responsible for a large part of the harvest, and local trade are gaining ground. Many are organizing delivery cooperatives, strengthening the female role in the rural economy. This empowerment translates into more autonomy within families and communities. The rural community itself is changing. Local markets are gaining new energy. Internal transport is strengthening with small truckers, and even maintenance and repair services are finding growing demand. The simple fact of knowing the harvest will have a certain destination revives the community spirit and reduces the feeling of abandonment that has marked rural life for so long. So the project isn't just industrial, it's social. It restores people's confidence that their work has value and that the state is not distant from their needs. Politically, the tomato factory project is both an opportunity and a challenge for Ibrahim Traoré. The opportunity is clear: solidify his image as a pragmatic leader who delivers concrete results and takes care of the population's basic needs. But the challenge is also obvious: keep the plant running with transparency and efficiency. The management of the $8 million needs to be clear. The exact origin of the funds has not been fully specified yet, and this creates an obligation to be accountable. Publishing contracts, purchasing timelines, and balance sheets of revenue and expenses becomes essential to build political trust. Furthermore, institutional mechanisms involving society need to be created. Local producer councils, simplified audits, and partnerships with universities and agricultural institutes can ensure the factory is not just a government project, but a state policy lasting and resistant to changes in leadership. Politically, if the factory succeeds, Traoré will reinforce his narrative of sovereignty and efficiency. But if it fails, it could fuel skepticism and strengthen the opposition. In a country marked by instability and distrust in institutions, the success or failure of this project could define not just a president's reputation, but the course of national politics. That's why the news about Burkina Faso cannot be seen as mere footnotes. They represent lessons on how a country can or cannot lift itself up from the essentials. The impact of the Burkina Faso tomato factory is not going unnoticed outside the continent. For the United States and Europe, any policy that strengthens food security and reduces migratory pressure is viewed with interest. A country that manages to turn its own production into processed food is less vulnerable to international price crises and less dependent on imports. In West Africa, neighbors like Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, and Mali are watching closely. The possibility of replicating the model of agricultural contracts combined with a processing plant could inspire regional initiatives. The logic is simple. If Burkina Faso managed to build a functioning factory in less than a year, why couldn't others follow the same path? For a global audience accustomed to seeing agribusiness as a rural engine, there is a natural connection. Other nations have gone through similar processes when the industrialization of milk, soy, or sugarcane transformed local economies. This parallel helps bring the reality of Burkina Faso closer, showing that development starts with the basics, with what people eat every day. In the news from Africa, the story takes on a rare character. Instead of tragedies, wars, or coups, we see a report of work contracts and dignity. This helps rebalance the narrative about the continent, showing that solutions created by Africans for African problems exist there too. Despite the optimism, challenges remain. The first is security. Burkina Faso continues to face attacks from armed groups and internal conflicts. A logistical interruption could jeopardize the factory's operation, limiting producers' access to the delivery point. Ensuring minimal protection of transport routes will be essential for the project's continuity. The second is climate. Desertification is advancing and threatening agricultural lands, reducing productivity. Irrigation policies, sustainable management, and adaptation to global warming will have to accompany industrialization, lest the effort prove insufficient. The third challenge is structural. Burkina Faso is a landlocked country with limited resources. This makes transport more expensive and limits the possibilities of large-scale export. Therefore, the immediate priority is truly to replace imports and ensure domestic consumption before thinking about foreign markets. Even so, the symbolic value is immense. Showing that it is possible to build a simple, measurable, and effective public policy in less than a year is a rare feat anywhere in the world. For international allies, this is proof that the country is trying to organize itself from the essentials. For critics, it is an opportunity to test whether Ibrahim Traoré truly has the capacity to turn promises into sustainable routines. In the end, the big question echoes beyond the borders. Can a young leader with tomatoes pave the way for a new vision of sovereignty and inspire other news from Africa? When everyone thought the story of the tomato factory was limited to numbers and contracts, a powerful comparison emerged. The tomato began to be called red gold. It wasn't just a poetic metaphor. It was the realization that this simple fruit could have as much strategic value for Burkina Faso as the gold buried beneath its soil. The surprise is here. By turning an everyday food into a national asset, Ibrahim Traoré's government showed that sovereignty doesn't have to be born from mega projects distant from reality. It can start on the plate, in the field, at the market. This red gold has become a symbol of a new way of thinking about development, practical, visible, and with an immediate impact on people's lives. This narrative shift alters the political and symbolic balance both inside and outside the country. Internally, farmers feel they are part of a national project. Externally, analysts realize that Burkina Faso is redefining its priorities, starting with the essentials. But the biggest twist is yet to come. In the same spirit of valuing what is local, the government is also moving forward on another strategic resource, metallic gold. By quietly mentioning the inauguration of the country's first gold refinery, Traoré suggests that the logic applied to the tomato processing at home, generating local value, can also be applied to the mineral sector. Thus, the tomato factory is no longer just an agricultural policy. It becomes the prelude to a broader strategy, turning resources into sovereignty and making Burkina Faso a living example in the news from Africa. Burkina Faso decided to start with the essentials. By building a tomato factory, the country showed that sovereignty is not built only with grand speeches, but with policies that reach the people's plate. In 2023, the announcement was made. In 2024, the line began operating. What seemed like just an agricultural measure has become a symbol of dignity and the future. Farming families no longer see their labor rot on the roads. Young people are finding opportunities in the countryside. Women are organizing cooperatives and strengthening their central role in the rural economy. With every tomato turned into paste, the hope of a people is strengthened. As Ibrahim Traoré himself said, "We do not ask for permission to be free. We rise up to conquer freedom." If the spirit of Burkina Faso has touched your heart, share this story. Subscribe to continue following an Africa that no longer bows. Because the real news from Africa is here in the work, the courage, and the belief that a different future is possible.